I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Each week, photographers gather here to connect, inspire, and create. And with the help of a guest speaker, we get a fresh dose of inspiration to spark new ideas and encourage us to try something new. You can find the schedule on my website at lindanickell.com/happiness hour. And while you're there, please consider signing up for our monthly newsletter. Tonight's guest is Liz Crane. Liz is a visual artist and photographer who transforms everyday moments into captivating works of art using just her iPhone and a collection of creative apps. Through bold edits, layered textures, and experimental techniques, Liz pushes the boundaries of mobile photography, turning ordinary images into expressive, dreamlike compositions. Her work, shared under @LizCraneArt on Instagram, blends elements of photography, digital collage, and abstract art, reflecting a deep curiosity for visual storytelling and a love for the unexpected beauty found in daily life. In tonight's presentation, Art in Your Pocket, Becoming a Better Phonographer. Never a fan of lugging around lots of camera equipment, Liz has been capturing photos with her phone since the dark ages of the iPhone 5 back in 2013. She will share some basics for how to easily get great shots using the native camera, and will also share some of her favorite creative shooting apps and techniques for doing macro, ICM, and more with your phone. So with that, welcome back to the Happiness Hour, Liz.
Thank you so much, Linda. I'm excited to be back and always love talking about my iPhone photos. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, so lots of beautiful scenery out here to photograph. I feel like I get spoiled for that. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about how to become a better phonographer. So I'll just a little background on this photo. You'll also notice it's the background for my Zoom. This is a climbing wall in Copenhagen, which I turned into something completely different. I flipped it on its side and thought it looked like a Norwegian village in the snow, and so I added some stuff that looked kind of like the Northern Lights. Anyway, we're not going to be talking a lot about my weird art tonight. That could be a topic for another time if there's interest. But what I'm going to be talking about today is just, how to make better use of that camera that you always have with you. So this first slide here, I'm just showing 3 shots that I like personally, and they're ones that it's like, these photos would have never happened if I didn't have my phone with me and if I didn't use it to take photos. The turkeys, it was just this weird opportunistic thing. I was walking my dog one day and there were these turkeys in this open space near my house and they were posing so nicely, and so I took some pictures of them. If I'd like taken the time to run back to my house and get my camera and come back, they would have been gone or they wouldn't have been in this position. Same thing with the fog in the next 2 pictures. The bridge in the middle is just a block or 2 away from my house. So again, just out walking, had my phone with me, caught this moment that, did not last very long. And then the last one is from my office at work. Obviously, I don't generally take my big camera to work with me. And San Francisco I work in Oakland, which is across the bay from San Francisco, and the bay was just completely smothered in fog, but the tips of the buildings in San Francisco were poking out. And again, another shot that I would have never gotten if I weren't doing it with my phone. So what I'm going to talk about tonight, and we'll see how much I get through. I have a lot of slides and there's a lot to talk about, so hopefully I'll get through at least most of this. But just some basics of the native iPhone camera and what you can do with the different photo modes that are available in it. I'll talk about some other apps that I like to shoot with for things like long exposure and ICM. I'll touch on add-on lenses just briefly, and then maybe a couple of minutes about editing. Not really going into detail, but just kind of walking you through some of the things that I think about with editing. If we want to learn more about editing, that could be a whole nother session. Because I don't like computers any more than I like big cameras. So I tend to do most of my editing on my iPad. So I've learned how to use all the various apps there. I will apologize to those of you who have Androids and not iPhones. I'm hoping that at least some of the principles that I talk about can still apply, but when I'm going through, screens where I'm showing settings and things like that, obviously that's not going to be directly applicable, but I'm hoping that there's enough similarities that you'll still get something out of this. Also, even if you have an iPhone, different models have different capabilities and different settings and can do different things. So if you don't have the same iPhone model that I do, some of these things may also not apply. So again, apologize in advance, but I'm blaming Apple and Samsung and all the people who make the phones for not making them more alike. But before we get into all of that, I want to start by talking about some words and phrases that we should be banishing from our vocabulary. So, everyone be honest, how many times have you said something like, it's just an iPhone photo? Or, it's not the best photo because I only had my phone with me? How many people have said that? I bet you probably, I mean, honestly, I have. So, I'm willing to bet almost everyone has at some point in time. So instead of saying it's just an iPhone photo, you can just say it's an iPhone photo. So maybe someone's admiring your image and asks you what camera you used for it. Or maybe you're showing off, like, look at this amazing image that I made with my phone. You could change it to it's just a snapshot. Like, nothing wrong with snapshots. We all take them from time to time. But I think, people tend to blame the phone for it when the reality a lot of the time is like, hey, if you'd been standing in that exact same spot at the same time, taking that same shot with your big camera, it probably still would have just been a snapshot. And we all like to capture those, vacation moments and things like that. But like, don't blame the phone for it just being a snapshot because it's probably not the phone's fault. And then, it's not the best photo because instead of saying because I only had my phone with me, like, let's be honest, I wasn't paying attention to composition and lighting, or I forgot that I can adjust the settings on my phone before taking a photo, or maybe I didn't take the time to make some basic edits afterwards, or maybe I was shooting straight into the sun or some other, non-ideal photographic condition. I think the trick is that it's easier to make bad photos with the phone because you have it all with you all the time. And I think it's also easier to be sloppy because you're not putting the same amount of thought process into a photo that you're doing with the iPhone as you are with something you might be taking with your big camera. It's so easy, so you just snap away, you kind of forget about the basics, or you're taking photos in conditions that you probably would not even bother bringing your big camera out for. So I think it's just take a moment, slow down, think about your composition, think about the lighting conditions, think about your subject, you know, get that attitude that that it really is a camera in your hand, not just a phone. So next question, what do we call this? You don't call it your real camera. Now, I'm guilty of this one too. Probably, I can almost guarantee at one point in tonight's presentation, I will probably say the words my real camera. I'm still working on banishing this one from my own vocabulary, but it's not your real camera. It's a camera. It's your big camera. It's your Sony or your Nikon or whatever, but your phone is a real camera too. So don't forget that. So, like I said, a lot of it, I think, is your attitude. If your brain is kind of stuck on oh, it's just a phone, you're going to, not take the care and time and attention to make really good images with it. And then you're going to be making excuses for them, like, oh, I only had my phone with me. But if you think of it as a camera and you try to apply some of the same thought processes that you would if you were shooting with your big camera, your images are going to reflect that. So this image that I'm showing here, this was actually taken with my iPhone 6S, like probably like 2014 or so. And, it's obviously the cameras on the phones have come a long way since then, but it's like if you're paying attention to trying to create a good photo with an interesting subject, you can create a good photo even if the camera isn't like the latest and greatest 500 megapixels, whatever. So that being said, phones aren't perfect. Can't do everything yet. Not going to win any wildlife photography awards with my bald eagle here. Quite honestly, even if I'd had the big camera and zoomed in on him, that still wouldn't have won any awards because it would have been a boring photo of an eagle against a blue sky. Not very exciting. But there are, with the phone, lack of zoom kind of limits the capabilities for wildlife. Night mode on the phones has gotten pretty good, but you're still going to probably do better, astrophotography with a big camera. And if you're trying to do like focus stacking of macros and things like that, phones aren't really great for that. So I'm not saying you can do the phone for everything, but it does have a lot of capabilities that I think people don't take full advantage of. All right, we're going to play a quick little game here. So if you could type in the chat, and Linda, if you could keep an eye out for me and tell me which one people are guessing. So I'm going to show you three sets of photos, and you have to guess which one. So out of each set of four, there are three iPhone photos and one big camera photo. So you have to guess which one is the big camera photo. So here we go with some flowers. So throw in the chat which one you think is the big camera photo.
Okay, we got C's, couple C's. There's a B in there.
All right. C is the right answer. That was taken with my lens baby, so it's got that sort of distinctive glow, so that gives it away maybe a little bit. All right, next up, landscapes. Which one was the big camera photo?
All right, let's see here. I'm seeing G's, E's, H. They're all over the place.
Okay. The correct answer was H. The others were all iPhone photos. And I will just say F was taken from the window of a moving train as well as being an iPhone photo. So I mean, I don't
Jan
think
wins the prize.
Hmm?
Doesn't say Jan wins the prize on that. She said H.
Okay. All right, and then last but not least, architecture. Which one is the big camera photo?
All right, let's see. One, okay, a couple of K's are in there. There's a J. All right. K seems to be the guess in
Okay,
there.
and well, you guys are actually pretty good. There you go. It was K. That was a cl abstract architecture sort of close up with my big camera. But I mean, you can see like the iPhone images are pretty close. Sometimes it's a little hard to guess which one. Of course, this is on the Zoom screen too. I'm sure that makes it even more challenging. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about the iPhone native camera. So first, the boring stuff, the settings. I will say before I dive into this and everybody starts trying to like frantically grab screenshots or write things down, Linda has said I can send her a PDF and she will put a link to it on a Google Drive or something when she posts this to YouTube. So I will PDF this whole presentation along with some of my notes, and so you will be able to get all of this. Obviously, if you still want to take screenshots or notes, go for it, but you don't need to because it'll all be available afterwards. So, before I dive into this, the real message that I want people to take away here is like, whatever kind of phone you have, like, go dive into the settings, look at what they are. Like, don't just pick up and shoot. Like, there's probably some things that you could do to improve your shooting. If you go in and you see a setting and you have no idea what it does, turn it on or off and see what happens. Play around. So, I think, you know, for those of you who happen to have the same kind of phone I do, maybe you can use some of these exact information here. But for anyone else, make sure you're just taking it as your invitation to go into your settings on your phone and kind of play around and see what is there, because that's the best way to learn. So I'm just going to try and go through this quickly again because I'm making it available afterwards and not everyone's going to have the same phone anyway. So when you go into this is from your settings menu. So you're not in your camera, you're on your iPhone settings, and you go to settings and you choose camera, and you're going to see this is a two-part screenshot of what's basically the same screen in the iPhone. You just scroll down, but it didn't all fit in one screenshot, so I have it in two. So this first one, the camera control thing, this is a weird new thing on the iPhone 16, so I don't really use that very much, but you can do what you want with that. Photographic styles, I always leave on standard because if I'm going to give it some weird look, I'd rather do that in post-processing. Don't pay attention to what I have on the video settings because it's just probably whatever the phone came with because I don't really do video. Using volume up for burst is handy if you're trying to capture a lot of quick action. So you can just hold down the volume button and it'll just take a series of photos and then you can go back and pick the best one. If you keep scrolling down your settings, I always recommend turning on the grid and level, and I suspect most phones, even if it's not an iPhone, have this option somewhere. It just helps you again when you're trying to like slow down a little bit and think about composition. This way you can sort of see like, hey, not that we should always follow the rule of thirds, but if you wanted to, you can see like, is my subject on, one of those points that gets the people's eyes attention. You can look and see, is your photo level? Because that's a great way to make your picture look like a snapshot, as if your horizon is all crooked. Let's see what else we want to talk about here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Fusion camera. This is an iPhone 16 thing, probably actually a Pro thing. basically like instead of just the 1x lens being a normal 1x lens and that's it, you can actually switch it between 24 millimeters, 28 millimeters, or 35 millimeters. So not sure people will do that too much. I honestly don't play with that very much, but if you really, really want to shoot at 35 millimeters, you've got that option. This is not picking a particular lens setting. This is just setting your default. Whatever you set the default to, you can change it when you're taking a photo. So it's just what it goes into when you open the camera. Portraits in photo mode. This is a pretty cool feature. Again, I think this might be only the iPhone 16s or 16 Pros, maybe 15s. I never had a 15, so I'm not really completely familiar with what they did and what they didn't. I'll talk about this more later, but I would recommend toggling it on because it's kind of a cool feature. Lens correction, I don't see any reason not to have that on. I'm not sure I see a real difference, but I put that on anyway. And then macro control, I recommend keeping this toggled on. And again, I'll explain a little bit more about that later. All right, so now we're gonna backtrack a little bit. So on this settings screen, we've got the formats and the preserve settings, which I didn't talk about. Those are things where you click on that and it digs into like one further level of the menu where you can have some more settings. So for formats, if you choose high efficiency, it's going to be Apple's HEIC format, which I didn't used to recommend. It used to have some compatibility issues where it wouldn't always open on, other devices and things. I've not had trouble with it lately, and it does take up less space, and at least in theory, it's a better quality image. Not sure my eyeballs could tell the difference, but in theory, it's a better image, so I'm like, why not? If you would prefer to save as like a JPEG, then you would just go with most compatible. That's fine too. There's nothing wrong either way, really. Photo mode, again, I think this is a 16 thing. You can choose between 12 and 24 megapixels. So it's like, why not pick 24? Like if you can have 24. The ProRAW and resolution control, I'll show you on another screen when we get to like looking in the actual camera. If you have this toggled on, it'll show you a little spot on your screen where you can turn RAW on and off for your photos as you're taking them. And then the Apple ProRes is kind of the same thing for video. So again, backtracking. So underneath the formats, we have this thing that says preserve settings. So, oh, whoops, sorry. No, I'm not going there yet. We'll get there next. So this is going back to the Fusion camera settings that I talked about a minute ago. If you want those options to shoot with 28 and 35 millimeter equivalent, as well as 24, you need to turn those on here, and then you need to pick which one it defaults to. If you don't turn these on, then you're stuck with the 24 millimeter, and that's it. Now we're going to the preserve settings. So this is one, play with these to your personal preference. For me, if I tend to like my camera to start in like the normal sort of default settings, photo mode, 1x lens, etc. And so if I change that mode, like if I put it into some other mode to do something with, it's usually like a special circumstance or I was taking a picture of a certain thing. And the next time I go into the camera, I want it back at that default again. So I do not leave most of these on. Depending on how you like to shoot, you may find you like to preserve more of these settings because basically any of these that you check off, it's going to save your settings. So like the next time you open your phone, it's going to still have that setting on. The two things that I want to mention, the two places where I make an exception to that rule, the exposure adjustment, and this isn't because I wanted to keep the exposure settings, but there's a spot on the camera screen where the exposure thing will show up and it's easier to get to if you have this setting turned on. And then live photo, Apple loves their live photo. I don't, unless I'm taking pictures of water and want to do long exposures. And if you don't toggle this on, then live mode is just going to be on forever. And if you turn it off, it's going to come right back the next time you turn your camera on. So you want to make sure if you don't want to always be in live mode, turn this off or toggle this on. All right, more settings. Sorry, we'll get to fun stuff soon, I promise, guys. So again, just going through the screen. And for those of you who don't have iPhones, I think a lot of these are fairly similar across different iPhone models, with just a few minor differences. For those of you who don't have iPhones, you'll probably have something similar on your phone. I think most phones are going to have similar types of controls, just the icons for them might look a little bit different. But again, it's like open that camera, and if you're seeing things on the screen, play with them, turn things on, turn things off, see what happens. So in the camera, You get all these things. So across the top of the screen, you have a little thing for flash, which I always leave turned off. The night mode shutter speed will show up here. This only shows up if it's dark. If it's not dark enough, night mode will not be active and you just won't see that at all. This is the exposure that I talked about, that I have that setting turned on so that I see this here, because then I can click on it and get to my exposure adjustment really quickly. Then you've got like this little caret here in the middle that if you click on that, it'll expand a specific menu at the bottom of the phone screen. Then over here, you've got things that you can turn on and off. So this raw max, right now the picture has a line through it. That means I have raw turned off. If you want to shoot an image in raw, you would turn that on. Same thing with live. Live is turned off right now. If I wanted to turn it on, you just click it and it turns on. The tone adjustment, I don't use at all. You can play around with it and see if you like it, but I prefer to do those sorts of things in post-processing. At the bottom of the screen here, this little flower icon will show up if you're in macro mode. It won't be there if you're not. You've got your 0.5x, 1x, 2x, 5x lenses. Depending on what kind of phone you have, you might have different numbers of lenses there. The 2x is not a real lens. It's like a software interpolation kind of thing. So the 0.5, the 1, and the 5 are the actual lenses. And then across the bottom, you've got the different photo and video modes that you can choose. Quickly, here's what I was talking about with so where you see the little 1x here, if you click on that, it'll let you toggle between the 28 millimeter and the 35 millimeter if you wanted to, and just keep clicking and it'll cycle through them. Going back to, so this is where, like, if you hit this little thing to expand the bottom menu, like your default bottom menu has your photo modes showing up, but if you click this little caret to expand things, then it'll replace that with a series of some of these other controls. So you've got the flash again, night mode. If night mode is on, you can click on the night mode icon here to change the exposure time. And you've also got like your aspect ratio. You can change your exposure here. So it just opens up some more detailed controls. And I think these are sort of the things that people don't always think about when you're taking images. You're just sort of like, oh, I see a pretty thing. I'm gonna hold up my phone. I'm gonna, click the shutter button. I'm gonna take a photo of it. But I think learning what these controls are, what they do, I think it's important, because then you can start to like think about like, oh, well, should I be, doing a little exposure adjustment here because the picture's too dark, in general, something like that. So again, just get in these menus, poke around, click around, see what they do. All right, I know that was like the whirlwind tour of the iPhone here, but I wanted to make sure that we get time for the more fun stuff too. So again, these are all iPhone specific. I imagine most Androids probably have a lot of these similar kinds of modes available. So hopefully some of this will be relevant for everyone. So the ones in purple are the ones I'm going to spend time talking about. So there's a bunch of different photo modes that come on the iPhones. There's photo. This is, just your standard, everyday, normal. Portrait mode lets you blur the background behind the subject. Spatial is, I don't use this. You can capture like these 3D type of photos for viewing on the Apple Vision Pro, which I do not own. So I've never played around with this. And then you can do panoramas, which are cool. I'm not going to talk about them tonight just because they're, very straightforward. Video modes. The one I have played around with time lapse on occasion, like if you've got clouds rolling by, or I did it with like fog rolling in, it can give you, a nice little video just showing, how the fog was rolling in, how the clouds were moving, or something like that. These other ones I never really use. Slow-mo is pretty self-explanatory. Cinematic is basically like portrait mode, except it's video, and then video is just your normal video mode. What I call these special photo modes, because they decide when they want to be available to you. You don't get to pick. So macro will show up if you get close enough to a subject, and night mode will show up if it gets dark enough. And I'm going to talk a little bit about both of those. So we're going to start with regular photo mode. So what I'm going to do in all of these sections, I'm going to have a screen talking about the settings. Then I'm going to go through a couple either examples or, things that you can do. And you're going to get very tired of seeing this particular corner of my living room because I used it for all of these screenshots, I think, when I was going through all these different photo modes. So normal mode photo, I think we talked about a lot of these settings already. So the things that you just want to think about when you're in this mode, it's like, Do you want a flash? I never use my flash. Maybe you have situations where you would want to. Whether you want to shoot in RAW or not. This is one where I'm probably going to be like a heretic and get kicked out of being, a photographer or whatever for saying this, but I don't like to shoot in RAW on my phone. It's too much effort afterwards and they take up space, and it's like I find that the HEIC images work just fine for everything that I'm trying to do. So I typically do not shoot in RAW. But again, that's one of those personal choices. If you want to, then you turn that on. Live mode, I only use if I'm doing water. And then the tone thing we already talked about, I don't really use that. Then you want to think about which lens and magnification to use. How close are you to your thing? The 0.5x will give you like this wider, more zoomed out view of things. 1x is normal, and then you can zoom in a little bit on it. Exposure is an important thing to think about. And again, don't just snap away, like think about it for a second. So if your whole image is looking too dark or too light, you can click on the exposure thing up in the corner here, and that'll give you a scale across the bottom that you can slide back and forth to increase or decrease exposure. The other thing that you can do is tap on the screen somewhere. So I'll do this a lot if I'm photographing skies, because there'll typically be like a bright white cloud or something like that. And then the phone will have set its like exposure based on, the trees that I'm photographing, but then you're going to wind up with these nasty blown out highlights. So what I'll typically do is, click on the clouds so that it's basing its exposure on that. And then you can, of course, fix the shadows in post-processing much more easily than you can fix blown out highlights. Notice the little yellow line across the middle here. This is telling me that I'm level. Also, you'll notice where I clicked, you get this yellow square. So that both tells you that that's where you want the phone to be focusing, and also where you're setting the exposure. You can slide your finger up and down on this little sun to change the exposure as well. So there's like 10 different ways you can change exposure here. This little F in the bottom left-hand corner showed up. We will talk about more later. That showed up because I had that setting about portrait mode or capturing portrait info in photo mode turned on. And that tells me like I've told the phone there's a subject here, so it's going to capture that depth information, and I can turn this into a portrait mode photo afterwards, even though it's shooting it in normal photo mode. And this is something I believe is new on the iPhone 16s. Maybe the 15s can do it. I know my 14 did not. So just a couple watch outs. So I think I talked about this already. Like, don't blow out your highlights. Those are hard to fix afterwards. So make sure you're exposing so that your highlights are proper. If other things are a little bit dark, that you can generally fix that pretty well in editing. Pay attention to where the focus is and make sure that what you want in focus actually is. And we're going to talk about this in a moment here. So one thing about the iPhone, this is a particular problem if you've got some things that are like in the foreground closer to the phone, and then you've got some things farther away. It's going to tend to focus on the stuff that's close, and then the stuff in the background is going to tend to be blurry. It doesn't have to be that way, but you have to tell it that's not what you want. So just whatever you want, make sure it's doing what you want, not what the phone just decided it ought to do on its own. So this picture, for example, it's probably hard to see over Zoom in this tiny little thumbnail on PowerPoint, but City Hall in the background here is a little bit soft because I forgot to tell the phone where to focus. So I had the phone like kind of sticking down almost into the water to take the photo because I wanted the reflection. And so the phone was focusing on some of these, water areas in here. The way you fix that, you tap on City Hall, and then it knows you want to focus on City Hall, and you can see like this image, City Hall is nice and sharp, and you've got the water in the foreground is a little bit more blurry. If everything is sort of medium or farther from you, then it'll tend to all be more in focus. Like I said, this is mostly when you've got like something in your foreground, you need to pay attention because I've taken some bad photos myself where it was focused on something in the foreground and I didn't catch it when I was shooting. And then I'm like, oh crap. And so, just another thing to pay attention to. While you're shooting, have some fun, get creative about angles. So the size of the phone makes it easier to get some angles than it would be with a big camera. So I know when I do like photography workshops, doing like architecture photography, and you're walking around all day, like with the big camera, like neck craned up at like ceilings and buildings, like my neck is killing me at the end of the day. You do that with your iPhone, it's not going to be quite as bad. So shoot up, you can stick the phone like down. I think this picture in the middle here, I think my phone was actually like a tiny little bit in the water, maybe. it's not like I wouldn't like sit it in a puddle for like an hour, but if it touches a little bit of water, not the end of the world. And this one on the right here, I got up, I put the phone like right up against a reflective piece of glass. And so you're basically like this here is glass and you're seeing like the reflection, and then you're seeing the actual, weird part of the building here. But it lets you do some things that you can't really, that would be harder to do with the big camera. All right, portrait mode. So this has become a real favorite of mine. I think when Apple first introduced portrait mode, it wasn't the thing I was craziest about. It didn't do a very good job. It would wind up you'd have like one flower petal and then the rest of it would be like weirdly blurry and things like that. But it's gotten a lot better. Still not perfect, but it's definitely gotten a lot better. So the great thing about portrait mode is like it's got a lot of options, but everything's reversible. So it's like you can change your quote f-stop, or you can change some of these lighting effects when you're shooting. But then if you want to edit it later and take those effects away, like what if you're as long as you're in the Apple native photo editor, you can change all of these things. So it's like you can just shoot it. Usually I just sort of shoot in kind of like normal natural light without messing too much with the f-stop, and then I do everything in post-processing to get the effect I want. But it's all like you can do it whenever. It's very, very flexible. So what you have in portrait mode, so I'm trying to remember if I was in shooting or editing. I think I was in editing here when I was taking these screenshots. So in the upper left corner of the screen, you've got sort of you've got like this little like hexagon, and then you've got the F. So the F obviously is the f-stop. It's not really an f-stop. It's Apple's funky software f-stop. So it tries to mimic the depth of field that you would get with that f-stop on a big camera. So if you click on the F, it gives you a scale down here where you can turn that up or down depending on how much blur you wanted on the background. If you click on the little hexagon, that's these lighting effects, which I'll show you on the next slide. But you click the little hexagon, and then across the bottom you get this series of different lighting effects, and they pop up into a little wheel, and you can kind of like scroll through the wheel and see what effect you like. And if you have that portraits in photo mode turned on in your settings that I showed you back a few slides, if the phone detects a subject, or if you've told it there's a subject by clicking on it, it'll automatically capture that depth info. And then when you go to edit, you will have these same options, just like you would on something that you took in portrait mode. So this just shows you the different portrait mode lighting effects that you can get. It's a little bit hard to see what studio and contour light do on this particular image on a zoom screen. So they both basically put a little more light on the subject. Contour light tends to be a little bit more harsh and contrasty. Studio light's maybe a little bit softer, but they're both putting a little bit more light like on the middle of the subject compared to what natural light gets you. Stage light is a fun one. I've done some really fun flower images with the stage light where it basically turns the whole background black and just whatever was in focus is in color. You can do stage light black and white, or you can turn it high key. So have some fun. And it's like if you decide you don't like it, you can just change it back. None of this is destructive editing in any way. You can change it all back again. Now, to switch between these when you're editing, you do need to be in Apple's native editor. I think if you took it into Lightroom or whatever, it's just going to take the image however it is when you transfer it over. You're not going to be able to change these options in there. Changing the subject in a portrait. This again is a newer feature that is only available on like the 16s and maybe 15s. I just know I did not have it on my 14. But if you've taken a photo in portrait mode, you can click to change the focus. So these two images that I'm showing here are the same photo. The first one is where like I'd clicked on City Hall, and so it's in focus. The water is blurry. If I click on the water instead, then it gets sharper and you can see the City Hall in the background is out of focus. So that's kind of a cool feature. So it's like if you do have a couple of things in your image that could potentially be your subject, you can play around with after the fact, switching which one you focused on, so you don't have to do it all in field. This is another example. There are limits. So this is one of those cases where it's like I was sort of sitting parallel to this flower bed, and so the flowers in the back are a little bit farther away and more out of focus. So I can switch around my focal area to a certain extent within the flowers, but since the back was never in focus to begin with, I can't make it in focus after the fact. So you can only make things in focus after the fact if they were within sort of the plane that would have been in focus when you took the photo. And then this last photo here, I turned off the f-stop feature entirely, which basically takes out all the portrait mode effects and it just becomes a normal photo again. And so you can see like that back part was never in focus to begin with, so you can't create something out of nothing basically. One little trick I'm going to tell you about. So the weird thing about the iPhone, I mentioned you've got the 24 megapixels. That only works on the 1x lens. If you switch to like the 0.5x or the 2x or the 5x or any of those others, you're going to lose the 12 megapixels. If you go into things like portrait mode, even if you're using the 1x lens, it's going to take you down to 12 megapixels. But you can cheat. I don't remember how I discovered this, but if you're shooting in photo mode, but you have that portraits in photo mode thing turned on and you select a subject, it will shoot a 24 megapixel image, but you can then put the portrait mode effects on it afterwards. So it's sort of cheating. Maybe Apple at some point will, discover this loophole and decide to close it. I don't know. But for now, if you want a 24 megapixel portrait image, that's how you do it. You have to take it as a regular photo, but make sure you're like clicking on your subject, make sure you get this little F in the bottom corner of the screen, and then it's capturing all that portrait information, and you can edit it in portrait mode into a 24 megapixel image. When I first discovered this, I'm like, well, what's the catch? I'm like, is the portrait mode effect not going to be as good maybe if you do it that way? These are side-by-side pictures of my little Snaps glasses here. And the left one I took in portrait mode. The right one I took as a photo mode and turned it into portrait later. I edited them both to the same f-stop, and they look the same. So I'm like, yay, now I get higher resolution portrait photos. All right, moving on, the dark side, night mode. Again, just going through some of the settings. So this will show up if it's dark enough. If it's not dark enough, you will not see it and you cannot magically conjure it in any way. It just will not be there. If you have it there, if you don't want it, you can click here and turn it off. I would encourage you, if you are shooting at night, like experiment with and without night mode, because I've been in some scenarios where I actually ended up liking the non-night mode photo better than the night mode. It sort of depends. I found some, because there's sometimes, like especially when you're in blue hour, where if you take a night mode photo, it ends up very, very blue and like a weird kind of unnatural blue. And so in those scenarios, sometimes I'll find like, no, I'd rather just not have night mode on at all. So I'll just turn it off for that photo. So again, play around. If you want to keep it on and you want to adjust your exposure time, again, you click this little caret thingy up at the top here, and it'll expand a menu across the bottom. This yellow, it's yellow, looks like a moon, I suppose. So that's night mode. If you click on it there, it'll expand this little bar where you can slide, to get your whatever exposure time you want. The phone does set the maximum exposure time you can choose based on what the conditions are. So if it's not super dark out, you're not gonna be able to go out very many seconds. If you're hand holding versus on a tripod, you're gonna have less options. So like if it's really dark and you're on a tripod, I think you can get up to like 30 seconds exposure versus if you're hand holding, it'll only let you do 10. And you do have to have I mean, it does some like image stabilization, but you do have to have pretty steady hands if you're going to be doing more than a couple seconds exposure. Because I've definitely had some blurry messes in my experiments. So this is just showing kind of this similar scene. I mean, it's the same image of the city of Napa lit up with like some holiday lights. This one is 2017 with my iPhone X, which at the time I thought was like not bad. But now in 2025 with the 16 Pro, I'm like, you can just see how much sharper everything is. Or if we weren't on Zoom, you would definitely see how much sharper everything is. I'm not sure how it's actually showing up here. But yeah, night mode has gotten like much, much better in terms of what it's able to capture. Here are a couple examples now. These are ones where it's like, if I'm honest with myself, like the big camera would have done a better job on these two scenarios with the Northern Lights and the comet, but I'm fundamentally lazy and I don't like being out late at night, which is why I don't really do a lot of astrophotography. But I'm like, I wanted to see these things, but it's like, it's already past my bedtime. I'm like, I'm not lugging out the big camera and the tripod and all this stuff. I'm like, I'm just going to see what I can get with the iPhone and be happy with it. So did those both night mode, but this is a little bit what I was telling you about the blueness when you're shooting in night mode and it's not like completely 100% dark. It's not too awful in this picture, so I left it the way it was, but it can sometimes be a little bit on the too blue side. Macro mode. Again, this is another mode that only shows up if the conditions are right. So If the yellow flower is there, it's on. If the yellow flower is not there, it's not. You can turn it off. So if the yellow flower is on and you're in that macro range, but for whatever reason you don't want to use macro mode, you can click on that to turn it off, and then it'll show it'll show as this sort of like crossed out flower. The catch is if you then want to turn macro mode back on, you've got to get within macro range, and then this little flower icon that's crossed out will show up again, and then you can click it to turn it back on. You can't just like pull the phone away and have it at a distance and be able to turn it back on. You've got to get into that macro range in order for that icon to even show up. And you might be thinking like, well, why would I ever want to turn off macro mode? If you're trying to use any add-on lenses, the back in the older generations of iPhones, they were totally fine if you told it to shoot with the 1x lens and you put a third-party lens over top of your 1x lens, it would shoot right through the 1x lens with the third-party lens over it. The iPhone has gotten, because of some of the things that they're doing, like macro mode, for example, is really like a software kind of like it takes images actually with a different lens than what you're seeing on the screen. And so the iPhone's gotten a lot more into like it thinks it knows best in terms of what lens it wants to shoot with, and it's not always the one you think you're shooting with. And so what'll sometimes happen is if you put a third-party lens on over your 1x lens, it'll switch to like the 5x lens to take a picture instead because it sees that you've covered up the lens that it wanted to use. And so that's where, with macro mode, like if the camera is seeing something close up to it, like the edge of that lens, that's when it's going to like make this unilateral decision to try and shoot with a different lens instead. And so if you want to shoot through the lens that you think you're shooting through, you need to turn the macro mode off. And I know that probably didn't make a lot of sense, but there are third-party camera apps out there that can make it a little bit easier, that leave that decision a little bit more in your control. So if you are ever shooting with those third-party lenses and you're getting frustrated with the native camera, flipping to a different lens and not shooting through the thing you want to shoot through, then, I would recommend looking into some of the third-party camera apps that might be a little bit less frustrating. So these are just a couple examples of macros that I did with my iPhone. You can see like some of them, they're not like super, super up close. I could have gotten closer to this bumblebee, but he was moving too much. So I tried to like stay out of his way a little bit. This is not a lily. It's a much, much smaller flower than a lily, even though that's kind of what it looks like. But I was able to get in really close on the stamens, pistils. I'm not up on all my like botanical parts. But I was able to get really in close on there. And then it captured this ladybug crawling on the edge of a railing. All right, I'm going to talk briefly about live mode. I don't use live mode much except for long exposures. So if you want to do long exposures of water, live mode is great. Again, going back to when you've got your camera open, this little like concentric circles icon here is for live mode. If there's a line through it, it's off. Click on it and that'll turn it on. If you are using live mode, make sure you're holding the phone steady for a few seconds before and after you click the shutter, because basically the phone has started recording before you click the shutter and it keeps recording for a second or two after you click the shutter, and then it kind of combines all those images to create the long exposure. And so if you're jostling your camera around, what's going to happen is it's just going to end up being a blurry mess. Also make sure that whatever you want in the photo is not right up to the edge, because when it combines all those images into one, you will get a little bit cropped off the edges in the process. And so you don't want to make sure that, the waterfall you were trying to photograph isn't now like halfway hanging off the edge of the photo. And just a reminder, once you've turned live mode on, it will stay on forever until you turn it off again. The phone will never turn it off for you. So make sure you're turning it off if you don't want it. When you go to edit a live mode photo, you can go, you'll see, it's probably a little hard to see on Zoom here, but where my cursor is, there's like a little thing that says live. It'll show up at the top of your photo when you're in your camera roll. And you can then, if you click on that, it gives you options of live, which is basically, even though it says live, it's just the still shot. Loop basically takes all the images in the series that it took and just kind of plays them in a short video loop. Bounce, just what it sounds. It takes the images and bounces them up and down. I don't know why anybody would do that, but I suppose maybe there's a use for it. Long exposure is the one that I will use. And so you just pick that and it'll like take a second and then it'll like combine all the images into something that looks like a long exposure. So this is an example. I normally would have straightened the horizon here a little bit because that bothers me when things are crooked, but I wanted you guys to see the effect of the cropping around the edges. So I did not crop this photo at all. So this is the like still mode shot. And this is when I tell it to do long exposure. And notice like these little bits of the train on the top of the bridge, like have all disappeared. You've got a little bit less trees on the side here. You've got a little bit less trees on the side here. So it's basically just cropped in a little bit all around. If you don't like that, there's another app I will talk about in a moment, which gets rid of that effect. Apps to make the phone do even more. So I'm gonna, running short on time here, so I'm gonna try and get through these fairly quickly. Bluristic is one of my favorites for doing ICM. This is one I think it's very underrated. I feel like I don't hear a lot of other people talk about it. But what's magical about it is you get to pick an area that gets held still, and then you can move the camera around, and everything else will blur while that one thing stays in focus. And I'll show you an example in a minute. But basically, there's not a ton of settings here. It's like there's this little box on the screen, and you kind of click that onto whatever you wanted to hold still. And then there's this red shutter button, and you just hold that down and you move the camera and you take your picture, and then you click on that again to save. I've got a lot more steps here, but I will leave that for the PDF, and you can read through those later because I want to make sure that I get through all of these. So I'll skip through that. But what does it do exactly? So here I clicked on my peacock on my chest over here, and you'll notice how the peacock is in focus and then everything else around it is kind of blurry. You can also do 2 points of focus. So the second one, I focused on the weird tree art here on the wall as well as the peacock. And so those two stayed in focus and everything else blurs. So it's not just straight ICM, it gives you a very unique effect. And this is just a couple examples of things that I've created with this in the past. So here it's like I focused on this little piece of the stairwell and I moved the phone and I captured this beautiful image of this girl that looks like she's sort of moving along or dancing on the staircase. Here I was like panning to follow this surfer who was on the waves. And so it's like he stayed in focus, but the waves and all the hills in the background blurred. This one, I was keeping the iris in the foreground a little bit more still, and then everything else moved. This last one is an example where I kept 2 points on this little piece of architecture that's sticking out. I kept those constant and let everything else move around that. I also did some other weird stuff to that photo. And Bluristic, unfortunately, is only available. I know that one's only available for iPhones, unfortunately, and I'm not aware of any equivalents for Android. Slow Shutter, I'm not sure if this is available for Android, but there are definitely other apps out there that are, if this specific one isn't. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the settings, but you can take a look at this later. And basically, you get a couple of different modes here. So they have like a motion blur, a light trails, and a low light mode, and you can use any of those to do your ICM photography. These are some examples. Oh, the other beautiful thing about slow shutter, I'll just back up for a second. If you want to do multiple exposures with it, you actually can, because once you take an image, you'll get this screen. It'll have these buttons that say clear, edit, and save. If you save it, great. If you don't clear it, you can take another picture and it's just going to be right on top of what's there on the screen now. So you can do multiple exposures this way. And so this middle image here, this was 2 ICM shots, double exposure. So basically I made the 1 ICM shot. I did not clear the photo, and then I took another ICM shot on top of it. The one on the left was just shot in light trails mode, gave kind of a cool effect. And then this one, I think, was in motion blur mode. I was just capturing some yellow laburnums in a garden. Average Camera Pro is another. I'm not sure if this is available for Android either. It's a very basic thing, but if you're doing multiple exposures, it's definitely one that you would want to look at. You're going to see things like this exposure lock, etc. That doesn't do anything. It doesn't work. The slow shutter button here doesn't do anything. It's a very old app that has not been updated. So I don't know if these things used to work and now they don't, but anyway, it's great. It's very great for the limited thing that it does, but you don't have a lot of like settings and options with it. But you can do cool things like this. I have an image of my Christmas tree where I walked like part way around it, shooting exposures as I went around. Similar thing with the vase of flowers, except I think I turned the vase in between each shot. So again, if you're into just doing straight up still image multiple exposures in camera, this is definitely an app to check out. I just did a little comparison here of average camera pro versus slow shutter for multiple exposures. So slow shutter, the big downside is you can't see like the new image superimposed on the old image until after you've taken the picture. Average cam pro, you can kind of see where it's going to be and you can position yourself before it actually takes the image. But slow shutter lets you use any lens versus average cam, you're stuck with the 1x. You can do however many exposures you want versus having a fixed number that you've got to decide on in advance. And you can also do the multiple exposure ICM, as I was talking about. Then honorable mentions, I will just leave these for the PDF afterwards, I think. But I use a lot of these. You can use them as a camera app, but you can also use them to edit your images afterwards. And so I typically will take photos with the native camera and then edit them to get the effects here, but you can also shoot with them if you prefer. Linda, how much time do I have left? Am I totally running out of time here?
No, don't rush. You're fine.
Okay. I mean, I'm getting close to done anyway, so I think.
It's okay.
So add-on lenses, I honestly don't use add-on lenses as much as I used to. I think back in the older generations of iPhones, they didn't do quite as much on their own. And so I think there was a lot more usefulness out of doing some of these add-on lenses. But lately, I don't do quite as much. There are different brands. I mean, there's a wide range. Like you can buy like fairly cheap kits that give you like 10 different kinds of lenses for, $30 or something like that. Or you can buy like a $200 add-on lens. So, the quality varies. I actually think some of those cheaper ones can be quite good. So you don't necessarily have to spend a bunch of money. There's some where the lenses will be like a clip-on mount, and then there are some that come with like you've got to buy their phone case to go along with it. So I used to always use Moment. Back with some of my older generation iPhones, I had like the whole collection. I had their macro lens, I had the fisheye lens, I had the telephoto lens. The macro was probably the one that I used the most. But like I said, I don't use this quite as much anymore. Although Reflex has this 240 millimeter zoom, which I'm like, it looks really cool and it's very small, but you still get a really good zoom. So I just ordered it. It's like sitting on my coffee table right now. I've not had a chance to like get it out and play with it yet. So I may be back to like trying the add-on lenses again. For macro, even if you have a phone that has macro mode, which not everyone does, I think with the iPhones, you definitely have to have the ones that have some of the multiple lenses because of it. Like I think you have to have like the 0.5x lens, or else you won't have the macro mode. And other phones, I'm not sure. But if you don't have macro mode on your phone, these can be great. Even if you do, you get a shallower depth of field with the macro lenses, and I'll show you that on the next slide, an example of that. Telephoto, like I said, I'd kind of gotten away from them as iPhones got a little bit better zoom, but we'll see what this reflex lens does. Fisheye, I do have. I don't use a ton. It can be fun, like for architecture, like trying to capture a ceiling that's a little bit wider view or something like that, but don't use it a ton. Lens Baby, sadly, they haven't made these in like years and years and years, but they had iPhone lenses that were made. I think they were designed for like the iPhone 4 or 5 or something like really ancient. Up to my iPhone 11, I was able to use it because I like created my own little makeshift mount for it, but I've not had great luck with it on my anything since the 11, which is very sad. So I had to go out and get a big camera and a real lens base so that I could get my fix that way. The flower image here was actually shot with the iPhone Lens Baby lens. If you want to do infrared, I highly recommend looking up some of Rad Drew's webinars. He's gotten really into like doing infrared photography with your iPhone. It is the black and white infrared. If you want color infrared, check out some of the apps that I showed a couple slides ago, because those will give you that color effect. It's not real infrared, of course, but you can use the black and white like infrared filters on the iPhone, and Rad has a lot of like great material out there to give you all kinds of details on that. But a lot of these, like if you're buying, especially like Moment and Reflex and some of these systems where it's like it comes with like the case that the camera or the phone case that the lenses mount to. A lot of them will have like filters and things that you can buy. So it's like if you want an ND filter, or if you want some other special effects filter, you can often use those on these attachment systems for the add-on lenses as well. So this is just to show you macro mode versus macro lens. So the one on the left was taken with the Moment 10X macro lens, and the one on the right was taken with the iPhone in macro mode. So you can see they both get like very similar level of magnification. I mean, I wasn't quite as close to the little weed seed in the one on the right, but I could have been. But you can see how the depth of field is much, much shallower with the macro lens versus with the iPhone macro mode. So this is why, like, I do love this effect. So that's why I still, bring out the macro lens every now and then, even though I don't really need it for the magnification purposes anymore that I used to back in the older generations of iPhone, but it does give that different effect. And then I'm going to say a little bit about editing. So I said a word about editing, but technically it's 3 slides with a bunch of words. So bear with me. I think it's important to note, like a little editing can make all the difference. I think really like one of my breakthroughs with iPhone photography was when I learned a little bit about photo editing and I realized that it doesn't have to have come off your big camera in order for you to like pop it into Lightroom or whatever and edit it a little bit. And that can really make a world of difference. So even if you don't do anything else, if you're not one of these people who's like super into post-processing, at least go in and like check the lighting. If you've got some shadows that are too deep, try to fix that. If your horizon's not straight, or if you've got buildings that are crooked, try to straighten your geometry a little bit. If there's something super distracting on the edge, crop that out. So at least like look at your image with that eye to like, hey, are there a couple of quick things that I could do to, make this look a little bit better? As far as my own editing workflow, I hardly ever edit on the phone unless I'm like on vacation and I want to post some snapshots to my Instagram story. Then I will, but otherwise I pretty much use the iPad for everything. Even my big camera photos. Honestly, when I go out with my lens baby on the big camera, those come onto my iPad too, because again, I have a computer, but I don't like to use it. It's just too much hassle, and I'm fundamentally a very lazy person. All right, so which program for what? So again, this is what I do. You can find other things that work for you. I do use the native iPhone, iPad photo editor a fair amount. So anything I'm doing with portrait mode photos, I will always start in the native editor just because then you can pick your f-stop, you can choose your lighting mode that you want. Or if I've got a photo where it just needs a little bit of general, like the whole thing needs to be brightened up or the contrast improved or something. It does not do selective editing. It does not do any geometry corrections beyond just rotating. So it's like if you've got a crooked horizon, you can fix that in the native editor. If you've got like keystoning on a building that you want to fix, that it's not going to be able to do that. For things that need a little bit more editing, I typically use Lightroom Mobile. That's my current primary editor. Used to be Snapseed, but I feel like I've gotten to like a few things about Lightroom, and I've also gotten more familiar with it, so I tend to use it more. I like their geometry corrections. I've been doing a lot of architecture lately, and I feel like it generally does a better job. I also like the new HDR mode, and it's not like the old HDR that you're thinking about. It's a much better HDR, but I just feel like it makes the pictures come to life in a way that, you know, that they couldn't before. And then Lightroom also has more options for selective edits and masking. And I think that's another thing where it's like over time they've added more and more of those to like you always could have them in Lightroom Classic, but they've added more and more of them to Lightroom Mobile. It's probably still not exactly equivalent, but it's a lot closer. And then I also like their AI remove tool. I find works really well most of the time. So those are the reasons why I've kind of switched to Lightroom being my primary. Now the catch on Lightroom is some of the things that I do, like the selective edits and the geometry, unless something's changed, you do need a paid Creative Cloud subscription to use those. I suspect probably most of you have those, but if you don't, you can do a lot of basic editing in the free version, but in order to use some of those fancier features, you would need the paid subscription. If you don't have the paid subscription, Snapseed is a great alternative. I used to use it a ton. I still use it sometimes, but a lot less than I used to because of all the reasons why I moved to Lightroom. It does have selective edits. It has some more flexible geometry correction options, which sometimes can work better than Lightroom. So, I mean, definitely if you've got something where you're trying to like mess around with fixing geometry, definitely play with it in both and see which one gives you the better results. It also lets you like bring in another photo to layer on top, which Lightroom doesn't. You can't really do like layering things together in it. You'd need to go into Photoshop for that. If you want a crash course in all things Lightroom, I was at Happiness Hour way back, session 115. I went back and looked it up. I did a very whirlwind tour of everything you can do in Snapseed. So go check out Linda's YouTube and take a look at that. Another couple of programs that I like a lot, Retouch. It's great at object removal, especially lines. I don't use it as much as I used to just because Lightroom's gotten much better about this, but they have a newer background removal tool, which it will like remove the background, but then you can replace it with like just a nice blurred, color. You can do sort of like motion blur lines. It's got some interesting effects that you could play with. So I've been playing with that a little bit lately and haven't given it up entirely as a result of that. And then Photoshop, I've been using the iPad Photoshop in a very, very limited capacity because I this is one where it's like if I actually need to use Photoshop, that's the time I will pull out the computer. But the iPad now has generative expand, and I don't normally like generative expand because I don't think the quality of what it gives you when it's expanding is necessarily very good. But what I do is if I'm going to have to do a more extreme geometry correction and I maybe don't have enough breathing room around the edge of my image, I will go into Photoshop first. I will expand the canvas. Most of it's going to end up getting cropped out in the end anyway. So if it's not like a perfect, if it's not very pretty looking, it doesn't usually matter. And then I'll take it back into Lightroom and I'll do the geometry corrections there and then I can crop in, but it just gives me that little bit of extra breathing room to get the geometry correction right and not have to have my building, like within an inch of the edge of the photo or something like that. A couple editing watchouts. So watch out for oversaturated skies. I think it's just the way their software works, but iPhones tend to make the sky pretty blue, like regardless of what you do. And if you do the slightest bit of editing, especially if you're doing like global edits across the whole photo, it can make the sky look like really unnaturally blue. And so, make sure you're going in to like Lightroom or Snapseed and doing some selective editing to take the saturation down just a hair if it's getting into that like weirdly unnatural blue territory. Another thing, if you're like me and you're airdropping things from your iPhone to your iPad to edit, things like portrait mode do not come over automatically. Each time you send a batch of photos via airdrop, you click the share button. Then before you actually go to airdrop, you click on the options at the top and there's a toggle for all photos data. And if you do that, then your portrait mode information will get maintained when it goes over onto the iPad. The very annoying thing, the thing that I hate is this setting is not sticky. So it's like you send a batch of photos, it erases itself. Now you need to like go and set that setting again with the next batch of photos. Like it's not even sticky for like 5 seconds to like send another group of photos. So that's one of my little pet peeves with Apple. I'm like, make that setting sticky, please. But if you don't do that, like you'll go onto your iPad and it'll still tell you it's a portrait mode photo and up in the left-hand corner of the photo, but you won't, but if you go in to edit it, you're not going to have the f-stop or any of the lighting effects or anything like that. So again, a little bit of annoyance. And then what I said before, that Lightroom Mobile is wonderful, but you do need that paid Creative Cloud subscription in order to access some of the things that I really like. And if you don't have that, then use Snapseed. And with that, so if you want to stay in touch, I think a lot of you probably already have found me on Instagram, but I'm Liz Crane Art. If you want to get in touch with me, lizcraneartstudio@gmail.com. Feel free to email me. And again, I'll be sharing this with Linda and she'll post a link to it along with the YouTube video. So
Yeah.
with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know I kind of raced through a lot of this, especially towards the end, but
There is one question from Darlene. I find I can't count on stage light giving me black backgrounds. Any tips for how to use this properly?
um, I think that can happen if you're in a very bright setting sometimes. And I will admit, like sometimes when I've done in stage light, I do a little bit of post-processing afterwards too. So sometimes you might, if it's not dark enough, you might need to go in and do a little bit of editing after the fact. But I would say like probably like take some pictures in different lighting conditions and see if you can kind of hone in on like, okay, if it's super bright, I know it's not going to give me this right effect. Maybe you could try even then, like if that's what it is, maybe you could then try taking your exposure down a little bit before you take the shot and then maybe it'll come out darker in the end. I haven't honestly played with that myself extensively, but that would be my thought. Like if it's too bright out, you're probably gonna not get as good of a dark background.
Okay. Let me roll through here and not see any other questions. I was actually trying to keep up with you and changing all my settings when you were setting it up. Because I
Well,
have,
that's exactly why I want to make a PDF available because like I didn't want people having to like sit there and try to figure it all out in the moment.
no, I actually like, didn't mind that at all. It's like, wow, I'm gonna laugh, but the next time I upgrade my phone, I'm gonna just say, hey, Liz, let's do a Zoom between the two of us.
Absolutely happy to.
You tell me how to set up my stupid phone. Hey, this was awesome, and it was very lots of information here. I remember we were talking about, hey, what should I talk about? And I said, I know this is probably, something you have already done, don't want to do, I don't know, but just doing like an iPhone class, just or not. I said iPhone because I have an iPhone.
Yeah, well,
Another
so do
plug,
I. Like I couldn't teach you
yeah,
under it if you wanted me to.
another plug for Linda's selfish hour. But this was really helpful. There were a couple of things in here I did not know, and especially this last thing that you said about when you're moving photos from portrait
Mhm.
mode. I was like, okay, now that kind of turned on a switch for me because I didn't know that.
Yeah,
So
well, it's
there's
one of these things like I noticed it the first time I airdropped something in portrait mode to my iPad and I went to go edit it. I'm like, where's my portrait mode stuff? And so like I Googled it and there's this like complicated thing that you have to do. I'm like, well, that's annoying.
it is annoying,
And
but
and it's
at the
stuck
same
around like for as long as ever since portrait mode has been introduced on the iPhone, it's like they have not fixed that. I'm like, oh guys, come on. Like how hard would it be?
Well, I'm not going to be demanding because the iPhone does
Yeah.
a lot of cool stuff, and I don't want to say that I'm not lugging around my big camera as much, but right now I'm not, and it's handy, and um, I know I'll get back to my big camera, but it is nice to have something that if I need to snap a photo, I have that
Mhm.
option to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and I went
Okay.
through a phase where it was like if I would go on vacation, I would always take the big camera with me, like just in case, because like you don't want to like miss that great shot because you only had the phone with you. And then it's like over time, I realized it's like the phone takes such good pictures. So it's like what I did like 2.5 weeks in Scandinavia last year. I did not take my big camera. I went to Vancouver for a long weekend just now, did not take my big camera. I'm like, I don't, I mean, if I'm going to do like an out of Chicago workshop in the Olympic Peninsula in October. So it's like, yes, the big camera will come along for that. The big camera goes to the architecture photography workshop that I did in February. So it's like it does still go places with me, and I still do like my lens baby for flowers. But yeah, the iPhone, pretty much meets my needs most of the time. So
Well, and two, when I did your introduction, it's like you're a visual art create, that's what you're doing. You're taking photos and making art out of them, like almost unrecognizable
yes,
photos.
like the one behind me here.
Right, right. And but that's what's fun about following you because a lot of times, I'll look at your photos and go, okay, I can recognize that. And then a lot of the other half, it's like, I'm not sure what that is. And that is enough, that's curiosity of like, okay, I'm sure she says somewhere in a hashtag or a caption. So now, I'm going to make my way through your feed. Okay, so Darlene, oh, this is a good question. Darlene's question is, do you have enough power in an iPhone for shooting a whole day? How are you staying powered up?
Oh yes, that is a great question. I have backup batteries. Let me see. Do I have one on the table here with me? No, I don't. But yeah, I do typically carry like it's just like one of those portable like power bank things where it's like you plug it into the wall, you charge it, and then it's got like a connector for your phone. So I do typically carry one of those with me because yeah, it doesn't always last. And I feel like my old like my iPhone 11 could have gone like all day, no problem. The 14 is a little bit iffier. The 16, like if I'm doing a lot of shooting, like it will not last the whole day, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But yes, the backup battery is great.
Yeah, I noticed I caught myself turning off my airplane mode just so that it wasn't, running all over the place looking for a cell phone tower, trying to like, sometimes that you do with the location information. I get that, but I don't always need it. But that
Yeah.
might oh, look. Oh, yeah. So there's some nice comments in here for you. I thought that was a question. I had to blink. My contact flipped over, but it wasn't a question mark. It was just some nice comments floating through there, Liz. So, all right, Liz, thank you for doing this. And I can't wait to tap you on the shoulder and see if I can get you back here next year.
Yeah, I'm saying, well, if we want to, if you ever want to go into more detail about any of the shooting apps that I talked about, because I kind of flew through those and I could do, a whole class on those, or if we want to talk more about editing on like mobile devices. So whatever people want to learn more about, let Linda know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm just going to throw in here. You hinted about maybe doing an editing on on your phone. I would like that personally. So, if there is something that you're interested in, then and you're in this room, go ahead and put it in the notes, and that'll give Liz some ideas of what she can put together for us next year.
Okay, I can also teach you how to make things like the image behind me, but that's that's not everyone's style. You might like looking at mine, but doesn't mean you all want to turn your photos into that. But
But sometimes just fun, just learning, how did you do that? Because
yeah.
maybe that's not something, everybody gets excited about, but just knowing how to do it and then choosing not to do is two different
Yeah.
things.
Well, if we do one on editing, there are some apps that get a little bit farther away from reality without going all the way to like all some of the stuff that I do. So I can show some of those.
I wouldn't mind that either. So Darlene's gonna team Linda. Yes, more on editing.
All right.
All right, there we go. All right, next week, wildlife photographer Ruth Hoyt joins us to share her tips on crafting your photography workflow from capture to creation. Until next time, go out, create something beautiful, and I hope that we see you again soon.